Hello, hello, everybody. We are back on the Meishan Edge where we highlight the unique advantages of the Meishan pig. We have myself, Laura Jensen, president of the American Meishan Breeders Association. Jonathan, who are you?
Hello, Jonathan Kemmer. I own and operate Oddbird Farm, and I'm the head of research for the Breed Association.
All right, and we have our esteemed special guest back with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Max?
Hi, I'm Max Rothschild. I'm a pig geneticist. I was involved with the original Meishan importation, and I've worked with pig genetics for over 45 years.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So we did a thing, and this was your idea. I think it's a great idea, an Ask Max podcast. So I sent an email out last week, and Jonathan did a social media post about it too. And we've got some great questions from membership and curious Meishan people that we're going to ask Max and see what we can learn today. Here we go. All right, the first couple of questions are kind of in the same vein, so I'm going to combine them a little bit. It is, where is the white spot on top of the head coming from, and why is white creeping into genetics more and more? What's the deal there?
Well, in China, most Meishan pigs have white socks, which means they have their feet are white and goes a little bit up their legs. They have a white tail, and sometimes white on the belly, and sometimes white in other spots. The white spot on the head, I occasionally saw in China, but not very often. And it appears that the breed's getting a little more white on the belly and in other places on occasion. That's a bit of concern, but it's not unexpected. What's happening is that people are choosing for parents, for the breeding stock, animals that have genes that throw a little more white. My suggestion would be that since most of the breeders here market a lot of their pigs for meat, that they continue to cull animals that have excessive white and try and stick to just white on the socks and white on the tail. They all can be registered. They're all Meishans. If you have a
Right.
pedigree, that's fine, no problem. But if you're working towards looking at what the pig looked like more in China, then white was more limited than white everywhere. So I encourage you to cull that occasional pig. Now, some of the white spots on piglets on the foreheads, that may go away if they're small enough. But excessive white on the shoulders or the sides, I would cull that pig. You don't need every pig to be a breeding stock.
Right.
So save back pigs that have just the white socks and the white tail, and you'll start to see those white problems disappear.
Okay, and I think that's what we had learned before, maybe from conference, Jonathan, that essentially if you see the white, if you cull it out, it fixes itself.
Right, yeah. And I think, Max, you even said once that those traits are actually really complicated. The traits for white points on pigs have like a lot of modifiers, and they're
That's
generally
right.
complicated.
That's exactly right. There's some main genes, but most of it is modifiers. And we don't know all the modifying genes. We know there's a bunch of them that control the amount and the placing. So the best way to do this is just stick to your guns. Choose market pigs that have excessive white, and go from there.
Yeah.
All right. And everybody listening, like Max said, the registry will not disallow pigs because of markings. As long as you follow chain of custody and the ear tags and the procedures in place, we're not going to be telling people, nope, that doesn't count. So just an important note there. All right, let's move on to another one here. This member noticed changes in body shape and stature that they feel like stemmed from each original university program. I feel like I've seen that too. Did any of the studies focus on body shape goals, like hogs that are higher USDA genetics, for example? Was this just a coincidence that it happened that way, or was there a plan to manipulate or make different body types?
So let's go back to how the importation worked. Everyone got pigs from the same family units. So the three groups, USDA, University of Illinois, and Iowa State University, all got a sampling from each family that was sampled in China. So they started off with the same pigs. And my guess is, and to my knowledge, we certainly didn't at Iowa State, and I don't think Illinois did, and I don't think USDA did. No one was selecting for size or body conformation. We were trying actually not to select for those. But as happens in small herds, chance starts to play a game with you. So if by chance they selected compact small animals, then they tended to get those in their succeeding generations. If by chance you on your farm chose a larger individual, broader, bigger framed, then you're likely to have bigger framed animals. Eventually, all these traits are generally controlled by additive genes, and so by crossing larger with smaller, you should get something intermediate. You can be fooled sometimes, and you can be fooled because you're only looking, most Meishan breeders have 2, 3, 4 sows, a couple of boars. You're looking at small numbers, and chance always plays a role in small numbers. Just when you think you got it figured out, you think you're going to flip a coin and get heads, you get tails. So you got to remember that most of you are dealing with very small experimental units. But if you keep trying to get animals that are more intermediate, that's what you'll get.
All right.
And I think you just made a really good point there about the small sample size. I mean, there were only 12 original pigs. So people are basing their entire idea of what the University of Illinois pigs were like on 2 sister sows.
Exactly.
And not even 2 sister sows, but the offspring of 2 sister sows as crossed with USDA and Iowa. You know, with USDA we had 7, and I feel like there was a pretty big difference even between lines within the USDA. I always thought that the offspring of Ming and Zhao were a little bit more compact, but pigs like Tang threw kind of larger framed hogs.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, Jonathan. The sampling that went to the universities was pretty balanced, but when it finally trickled down and became the American Meishan Breed Association, the sample was a lot smaller. And so this is what we call a bottleneck effect. And there's a lot of genetic variability. It's hidden, but each farmer, each Meishan breeder has, again, very few animals to which to sample from. And so the best thing to do is, if you want to get your pigs larger, find somebody that has a larger boar. You want pigs to be smaller, find somebody who's got a smaller boar and start to use those.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the genetic drift study from Harvey Blackburn, in the intro it talks about how at the university facilities they basically matched litters in order to keep the lowest COI and then selected the individual at random. And I don't remember if that was referring to USDA. Is that how you selectively bred them at Iowa State, or was there actual selection involved of any kind?
We had random selection to keep inbreeding coefficient of inbreeding low. We did no selection on body shape, body size, none of that.
So you did select the individual at random, and
Yes,
then just
absolutely.
match litters according to low COI.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, I should say, again, small numbers. If one boar wasn't working, I couldn't guarantee that the herdsman didn't get frustrated and decide he was going to use another boar more times than we wanted him to.
Sure.
Yeah. We were talking earlier, Max, about what sampling is in pigs. Could you share that with our audience? That
Sure.
we're working with the 12, but what is it?
So when I did large-scale selection experiments or other experiments, we didn't look at 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 litters. We tried to look in the hundreds of litters.
Yeah.
So most studies would involve somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 500 litters per year. And so, again, when you look at just very few litters, I don't know how many litters are registered per month in your breed, but I'm guessing it's a limited number. So you got to be careful jumping to conclusions about what you think you see on your farm.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to share to see if I've got the right perspective on it, as I hear you talk, and I've had the honor of working with you for a while now, it seems as though you can plan all you want with genetics, and then you get what happens from genetics. Is that a good way to say it? That it's still kind of a wild card, in
Well,
some ways.
the average effect we can predict with large numbers pretty
Okay.
well. And if we use DNA, we can predict things even better. But
Okay.
again, I remind you that every location on the chromosome has two alleles, two forms, and if they're heterozygous, an A and a B, for instance, on the other chromosome, it's like flipping a coin. I can't be sure which chromosome I'm getting from which parent.
Yeah.
If some of the characteristics are fixed, so they're A on both ones, then I would expect that. So you've done a good job of limiting inbreeding. So there's still a fair amount of variability out there. So I can't predict without fail what the situation is.
We're just too small. Yeah.
And that's why you want to keep at it. Don't give up. You find something you don't like, don't use it. You find
Yeah.
something you like, use it.
Yeah. Yeah. It is that simple. I'm going to ask one more question on body shape, and then I'm going to throw it over to Jonathan for some of the questions he has. The question is the primary way to achieve a desired body shape, as for example, focused on a meat hog through just our own breeding, or can it be sped up by seeking pigs with certain university genetic lines?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't seek certain university genetic lines because, as Jonathan said earlier, the sample that started the American Meishan breed was an unequal sampling from the different research herds that were there. The best way to get the size you want is to put in mind what the body shape is. Now, let's remind ourselves what the body shape is of a Meishan. It's generally a relatively heavy set animal with a sloping back and a pendulous belly, and good feet and legs, and a wrinkle on its face, and then certain body color description. If you are determined to change that breed, well, maybe maybe what you should do then is keep your purebred animals as is, and develop some crossbreds that you would market all your crossbreds. Those crossbreds could not be registered, but that's not the point. A lot of people are selling crossbred pigs and other breeds to produce a market pig that they like.
Yep.
And Meishan could play an enormous role as one of the breeds to produce crossbred pigs for certain markets.
Absolutely. I think we're starting to see that emerge now with some folks.
Well, back to what you were talking about earlier, I think it's something I've talked to a lot of breeders about, because they'll say, my herd's too much USDA, I need more Illinois, or even wanting to preserve those lines. And I think if you want to bring in lines that you don't have just to see what's there, that's a good thing. But I think one of the things that I try to express is that, I mean, like I was saying, the programs at these places were to breed the pigs at random. So it's not a genetic source in the way that it is, in a traditional breed with a longer history. If you have a pig, say you have a farm that specifically bred pigs for a specific purpose, that line means something because it means that they selected that pig for that purpose. Whereas with these, USDA, Illinois, Iowa, that was our source, but they were never bred for a purpose.
That's
so there's
exactly
nothing
right.
descriptive. We can make these kind of half observations, but there's nothing really descriptive about the USDA line.
And we don't want chance to play a role here. If you want, eventually what I think will happen is that you'll clarify you have a breed standard or a breed description,
Yeah.
and you'll clarify that description by making it maybe a little tighter or a little more more specifics. That's fine. Most breeds do that at some point. But I think you got to get away from this USDA, Illinois, Iowa, and think genetic variability. The breed has a lot of variability. If you're not particularly happy with whatever pigs you have, try and get something, a Meishan, a registered Meishan from some other breeder that fits the characteristics you want to put into your herd.
Yeah, I agree. That's where we are. The genetic diversity, I think, was critical to get us started and put us where we are. But I think it's time to look at more of the characteristics and where you want to be with your program. Absolutely. Jonathan, what you got? Let's throw a question out.
Well, being that we're talking about body types, we had a breeder who noticed that on their farm they have some taller, lankier pigs, and some smaller framed but broader pigs. And they're trying to combine the taller frame with the broader stature. And when they cross the two, what they tend to see is one or the other. And so what they're asking is how you can best combine them. Is trial and error really the only way to do it?
Okay, well that's an interesting question, and it's a little difficult to know the answer because your question, the person asking the question said tend to be this way. They didn't say they were absolutely always type A or absolutely always type B.
I think that's what they were getting at, that they've yet to find a pig that has the best of both.
Yeah. So my point, what I would make is that without knowing some of the pedigree, how tied together their boars and sows are, it's a little hard to answer that. But I would always tell people that generally size, weight, size, general character of the body frame is controlled by many genes. Therefore, it's additive. And if it's additive, if I make enough matings between, for argument's sake, tall and lanky with short and stubby, I'll get something in between. If I make one or two matings, yeah, I could see some that are tall and lanky and some that are short and stocky. But on average, again, the sample size is a bit small to jump to conclusions. So try and take the animals that meet the body type, save those back as breeders, and move forward.
All right. Do you have another one in that vein, Jonathan?
Sure. How can we identify recessive versus dominant genes when observation is our only tool? And how can we capture beneficial traits that are from recessive genes?
Okay, those are two good questions. Let's start with telling dominance from recessive, okay? So I use humans as an example. If you go and look at a family, what you often notice between the mother and the father and the kids is that they may have characteristics of both parents. Those are probably additive genes. Or they specifically have characteristics of one parent, like big ears or earlobes or something like eye color. Those tend to be caused by recessive and dominance. And if you see those traits all the time in all the offspring, it's probably dominantly controlled. If you don't see that characteristic in either parent, it could be either additive or recessive. I can't tell you that without, again, many litters to understand. Yeah. One of the indications that something is recessive, and we see this mostly with mutations, is I might have a 1/4 of my litter. Almost exactly 1/4 of my litter has a certain characteristic. And if that's the case, I tend to think it's recessive. Doesn't guarantee it. Got to do more experimentation to be sure. One litter doesn't resolve the issue. Now, going to the second question, how do I save the best recessive traits? And the answer to that is save the animals that have those traits that you like, whether they be additive or recessive. Continue to breed those with animals with similar traits that you like. And
right.
And that's the only way to do it.
So I've got an add-on to that as well, guys. How can we start testing the lines to see who has what?
Well, I don't know what they mean by what, but if we're going to we can certainly do some molecular testing. For instance, we could test for having the right alleles for the estrogen receptor gene, which would be fixed. And the test exists, and it can be done. That's one thing we could do. There are not very many that's the only, I would say, well-recognized gene test in Meishan pigs. We could use molecular genetics to do DNA testing for to know who the sire is, if in case, for instance, somebody's using pasture breeding with multiple sires in a pen, we could use DNA to do that. But most genetic disorders have been tested and removed in the other breeds. And to my knowledge, they probably don't exist in Meishan. We don't have the stress. We have the stress gene, but not the negative stress alleles in the Meishan breed, for instance.
Interesting. Yeah. And genetic testing, for our listeners, is in the works. I think we're hung up in paperwork getting set up with the labs and things like that. So look for more information this year on that. Okay, sorry about that.
Can I ask you to clarify something?
I'm sorry, yes, go ahead.
So you're talking about dominant versus recessive genes, and I think everyone knows what that is, but then you're saying sometimes it's additive.
Right.
What do you mean by additive?
Okay, so let's just give an example here. I wish I could show this, but let's just say, for instance, we're working with something like height, okay? Mm-hmm. And we'll give the example that a tall animal is 10 and a short animal is 4. Okay, mm-hmm. So if it's dominant and we breed a 10 to a 4 and the animal's homozygous dominant as both alleles, all the offspring will be 10 in size. Okay, if it's heterozygous, then half the animals will be 10 and half the animals will be something intermediate. Okay, if it's additive and it's 10 and 4, I would expect every animal to be 7.
And that's because when you're talking about additive, it's not just one genetic trait that determines it, it's multiple?
No, it's because the genes act in an additive manner. They don't dominate. Okay. They don't dominate the other alleles, or they don't require the other allele to be like them in the recessive case to be seen.
So it's not always one or the other.
It's not always dominant or epistatic. Dominant or recessive. Could be additive. And then there's another form of gene expression called epistasis, mm-hmm. in which genes at another location affect the genes at the location you're interested in. And that happens sometimes. For instance, coat color in dogs has an epistatic. In Labradors, for instance, has that. Where if they have one certain gene, it doesn't matter what the other coat color genes are, dog's going to be a certain color.
Is that what people used to call linking?
No, it's not. It's not necessarily linkage. It's how the genes affect things. Okay. Linkage is when I have genes on the same chromosome in close proximity. So if I select for one gene, I tend to get the effect of the other gene because it's linked and it's dragged along.
Okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
All right. What's next, Jonathan?
Well, one question I had, we were talking about line breeding, and we went over it a little bit, but I was wondering if you could help us by kind of explain in what ways can line breeding benefit a herd, and in what ways can line breeding be a detriment to a herd, and then also same for an entire breed. How can line breeding benefit a breed, and how can it be a detriment to a breed?
Okay, so line breeding, by definition, is a mild form of inbreeding. And what they're in line breeding, what they're doing is they're picking out a superior individual and attempting to trace the matings using individuals that trace back to this individual. So not like brother sister because their father was good, but maybe 3 generations down the great grandfather was good, and they continue to use animals that are related to the great grandfather. Line breeding is really good if, and only if, the individual that they're tracing themselves back to is superior. Now, you asked how can it screw up things? Well, sometimes people pick a so-called superior individual only to find out later that maybe it carried a mutation that didn't show itself till later. And so now you've infused the breed with way too many recessive mutations that don't help the breed. That's one possibility. The other is that people change what they want. In cattle, line breeding was the rage. But if you look at some breeds like Angus, at one time they wanted small, compact cattle. And they did all this line breeding. What'd they get? Well, they got some dwarfs because the dwarf gene was hidden. Then all of a sudden they wanted large individuals. So now they had to go back and find large individuals and breed to them. Well, in big breeds you can get away with that, but you can be very damaging in small breeds if you excessively line breed without really knowing what's the desired traits that you want. So you can line breed, sure, but you got to do it carefully.
So you can kind of like paint yourself into a corner, so to speak.
Exactly, and you may paint yourself into a corner about an individual that you thought was most superior animal in the breed, and may turned out not to be, or may have turned out to be an animal that sooner or later people said, well, it's too compact, it has this or it didn't have that. It's hard to know. I think right now, you're in the Meishan, at the stage you're at in the breed in the U.S., you want to pick to get animals of medium size and stature, the right markings, animals that are prolific, and I don't think you can do that with line breeding because you really can't do line breeding very well unless you have a very large herd and lots of parental stock.
Yeah. Well, and it's also an issue of, like we talked about, they were bred at random for 20 plus years. And at least from my experience, I've not found the perfect pig yet. I think we're still in kind of an assembly stage where it's like, we'll have a pig that maybe it's big and has good growth rates, but it's not the best mother. Or you have a pig that produces great litters and is a great mother, but maybe has some things to be desired with their growth rate or their size or feed efficiency or something like that.
The breed in China was best known for being docile and a good mother. Growth rate was not very much involved in what was being done in terms of selection criteria, because originally the Meishan came from small households, got fed whatever they had available. You didn't want a pig that had a large appetite. In pigs, I want to go back to that. In pigs, appetite is the main driver for growth rate, and so in China they didn't have unlimited feed sources, so they didn't want a pig with enormous appetite. They didn't have anything to give it. So growth rates, we can certainly alter growth rate, and we can certainly alter growth rate and keep litter size good, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
Yeah, cool. Interesting. Jonathan, do you have another one?
Yeah. Why are registries important? Why are breed associations important? Is it worth having registered stock?
And the answer is absolutely yes, because the registry is, and we can go back to the historical aspects of breed societies and registries. People developed breeds by breeding animals that had similar characteristics. They did mild inbreeding to fix those characteristics, and then they said, I got this animal that's special. And so how do I protect that product? And it's no different than a trademark or a copyright or whatever. A registry is essentially a copyright for the animals. And so if you think it's important to have a Meishan, then how are you going to prove it's a Meishan? And the only answer to that is you can only prove it if it's a member of a registry. If you don't think it's important to have Meishans, then why are you breeding them in the first place?
Right.
So I'm always reminded of the time I once went to a certain country and I saw these Adidas shoes. And I thought, boy, my kid would really like some Adidas shoes. And I bought them. And the kid wore them for about 3 weeks until they turned into complete nothing. They just wore out the zip. And it's a perfect example. It may have looked like an Adidas, but it wasn't Adidas. So this is the same story with a registry. If you want the characteristics of the animals you're interested in, register stock, work with the breed association to get the standards that you want and produce the pigs that your customers want.
Yes, thank you. That's something that I see a lot that, people say that papers don't matter, but then they say from registered stock, selling from registered stock. So at some point it matters somewhere, and the registry is why we're here today. So,
And
uh,
I don't remember the fee structure, but I remember when I looked at it once, I thought it was
yes,
pretty reasonable. In fact,
yes,
maybe
yeah.
even too reasonable. I don't know, but
It hasn't changed in the 7 years that we've been doing
well,
this. It's $10 for a certificate, $20 to transfer, and you can be a member for $35.
I'd say that's
So,
pretty reasonable in today's day and age.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think also for myself as a breeder, what I've learned over the years is that you can make a lot more progress when you coordinate and work with other breeders. I started with the second most diverse herd outside of the foundation herd, and even then, it's been a huge benefit to be able to pick up pigs from, Terravite or Laura or other people that have a good breeding program, because they find something really good, they breed back to it, and now they have an excellent source material for me. And unless you have the records that we keep as registered breeders with the pedigrees and the litter sizes and stuff like that, that's about the only way that you can guarantee
yeah.
what you're getting. I suppose people could be keeping those records outside of a registry, but at the end of the day, I just don't understand how you can say it's not important to know your pig's pedigree and who its ancestors were.
Agree.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to jump into some of these other questions, if that's okay. In our last podcast, I think it was with you, Max, you talked about tissue sampling through RFID tags. Will that get what we need to start testing for genes?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of ways to get a sample for DNA. I can take some blood. I can take a hair sample as long as I have the root of the hair. I can take ear punch. The tags you're talking about actually take a small punch and save that material. All of those will work to produce DNA that can then be evaluated. We're in the process now. We're working with a company, and as Laura said, that the company we need to work out all the paperwork so that it flows easily, and maybe even get some discounts at some point. And once we get that, then there'll be a variety of ways of doing it, and each breeder has to decide what they want to do. The advantage of those ear tags, any of the ear tags that take DNA when they get the punch, those tags, you have an ear tag, so you got an ID on the pig, and you have a DNA sample. And so those are kind of a dual purpose.
Yeah. And I think last we talked about it. I saved hair from the foundation hogs that passed here with the follicle on them, and I have the last two here that I think turned 10 this month. So I think that's a resource. If I remember right, we were going to work with that first, since that would be the best baseline possible, and then go from there.
Yeah, and that should work well. I know people are kind of chomping at the bit, so to speak, to want to do something, but I want to remind you, we have limited information about the DNA on Meishan pigs. It's not like Yorkshires and Durocs, which have been thousands of litters and studies known and all kinds of stuff. So, everybody always wants to get the fanciest phone and the fanciest TV. But half the time, if you're like me, I can't figure out how to do half the things on the darn thing. Yeah. So I say let's just take it easy here. We're going to do some DNA testing. We'll develop a pedigree program, so it'll be especially useful for people that do pen matings with multiple sires in the pen. It'll help in cases in which the boar jumped the fence. That's a good starting place. We can also at the same time test and try and make sure that all our females all our animals have the right allele for litter size, have a pair of them, they're not heterozygous. those are the places we can start, and I think there's some hope that that'll be ongoing late summer and into the fall.
Okay.
So would it be
Fantastic.
fair to say that because this research has mostly been done for the more common breeds, it hasn't really been done for the Meishan, we're not really at a point where we could send off and have a test to see which pig has better feed conversion or meat quality. Like those tests just don't exist for us yet,
Well,
right?
I'm going to hedge this one a little bit. Um, my lab developed 10 or 12 genetic tests. Several of them were extremely successful. So there's 2 or 3 meat quality ones,
Okay.
and they work very well in the major breeds. And so they can identify, for instance, that what makes a better Duroc or makes a better Berkshire. And of course, those 2 breeds have the highest frequency of the desired allele compared to the white breeds. So it's likely that those gene tests would work in Meishan. But have I ever done that to prove it? No. I would have to prove it. I would have to genetically test the animals that I sent to slaughter, and then have somebody score the meat quality. And then 1,000 pigs later, I would feel, or 500 pigs later, I'd say it looks pretty good. Now, the meat quality ones are both mutations. They're both causative mutations. So I have a lot of faith that they would work in all breeds. But 100% sure, no.
That's
My
really
my
interesting.
intent would be to organize some trials after we get this going and see how things
Yeah.
work.
We're game. I know, and a lot of members are listening to this, going, "Me, pick me." So yeah, we're behind you. Any of that you want to do,
And
we'd love to work with you.
it has a double benefit. Meat quality is a great thing. Uh, Meishans on average have great meat quality, but there's some that must not, and there's some that have better than average meat good quality. And so, one thing might be at one of your conferences is maybe bring in somebody who would give a small lecture and demonstrate what makes good meat quality. It's the color of the meat, it's the drip, it's intermuscular fat, all those things.
Would that be some like a judge or something like that that can score it within different scales, or we can talk more in detail? But I'd love that. I think we all would
Yeah.
love that.
Well, we can all start with the pork people publish a chart that has colors of pork chops, and which is the desired one and which isn't. Most of the Meishans will fall into the desired categories, and it shows what marbling looks like. Things like drip is tied to color, but not completely. It's drip is also we need to remind people that there's proper ways to slaughter pigs so they're not stressed and their meat quality is better. So you don't really need a judge. We could probably do a little in-house training to remind people about the right way to do this. I don't know what percent of your members who sell Meishan pigs at the local market, what percent butcher their own pigs, or do they send them to a abattoir? I just don't know the answer
Yeah,
to that.
yeah, you can't legally sell to those markets if you're doing home butchery unless you're
Okay.
licensed.
Yeah, they have to be at least state inspected, if not USDA
Yeah.
inspected.
Okay.
I've largely let my processors do my cut work, but I'm actually buying that bandsaw tonight, and so at the end of this month we got 5 hogs coming in, and we'll be doing all our own chops and cuts and all that stuff. So it actually gives me a great opportunity to get those charts and things and look at it a little different.
Yeah,
But I
and
think you're exactly right. I mean, even if you're talking about a professional facility, whether it's state inspected or USDA, they're not all saying one to another. The facilities they have that show the carcass after they down them can be very different, and that can have a big effect on pork quality.
right, and do they rest the pigs before slaughter? Do they
I
keep
do, yeah.
all these kinds of things? So,
Yeah, it makes a difference.
and I think one thing to consider, Jonathan and Laura, would be to write up a little fact sheet about what's the desired approach of how how the pig should be taken to the abattoir, slaughtered, what characteristics we look for in the meat, those kinds of things. And that can certainly you can go to the Pork Council. They have all kinds of information on that, including the pictured charts.
Okay.
And that holds for all pigs.
Yeah, I have seen those. It's been a minute since I looked at them, but thank you for that. And I hadn't really thought about applying it here, so I think that would help a lot of us out, actually. All right, so the next question is, I know diet's not your thing, Max, but it says best diet and care for a farrowing sow. What does that look like?
Well, you're exactly right. I wouldn't want a nutritionist giving genetic advice, and so as a geneticist, I don't want to give feeding advice.
Right.
I would say, however, that with some modification, there are extension agents in the states that once they're told that these are Meishan, they can help work out a diet for them.
Okay.
But generally, I'm guessing a regular pig diet of corn and soybean and with proper vitamins and minerals and protein levels, and then with additional roughage would be probably the most appropriate diet for a pregnant sow.
Yeah.
Jonathan feeds sows. I'm sure he knows much more about this than I do.
Yeah, we've actually been working on a series of podcasts of late about alternative feeds and how to feed, and there's a lot of information coming out on that. Jonathan, do you want to do just an abbreviated version of your take on a best diet for a pregnant sow or a farrowing sow?
Sure. Diet, especially in the last 2 months, is critical. You never want to underfeed them. You will never get a better return on the money spent on feed, especially when they're producing milk. I think the old Morrison feed guides say that at that stage a sow needs something like 18,000 calories a day, so don't be surprised if they're eating more than 10 pounds a day of grain. I think Max is right on with extra roughage. Because that's going to be an older pig, they are going to be better suited to digest fiber. And I've seen all kinds of studies just on Meishans that they lay down longer, they're more docile when they have more roughage. It also, because they're digesting that, the microbial, how should I say this, environment in their gut, those microbes will actually be in their milk and other body fluids, and that is really critical for the offspring if you want them to eventually be better at digesting fiber as well.
There you go. All right, let's move on to the next one. Where could
Wait,
Meishan...
I want to add one small thing to that.
Okay, sure.
From our experience also with the Meishan sows, of course I don't know what the farrowing units are like on your farms, but giving the sow a little exercise every day is a great thing. So pen up the piglets, and walk the sow a little bit. That makes sure she'll defecate regularly, and Jonathan's exactly right. One thing we did notice about feeding Meishans is you think you're feeding them enough, and what you find out is they milk down too much. They're like a dairy cow. They milk down too much, and if they don't have sufficient stores, the subsequent litter might not be as large as you'd like it to be. So make sure you keep enough feed into that sow.
Especially when the little ones start eating, because Meishans are born with a more advanced digestive system than other pigs, and the little ones will start eating grain at 5 or 6 days old, and that's when I'm feeding like sometimes 15 and 20 pounds a day. Because you still need enough for mom to produce milk, but the little ones are also eating.
Yeah, and you feed a little creep feed, I assume, something like that.
No, I probably should.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I'm feeding to them, I think the little, because for the roughage, I just have alfalfa hay, and so the sows can eat as much of that as they want. And what I'm feeding directly to the sows is like an 18% corn soy mix, so I don't think the little ones have an issue with it.
Okay.
And then also, don't be surprised if the sow doesn't eat on the first day after giving birth. Mm-hmm. A lot of people freak out about that. It's actually very normal that they don't eat anything until day 2.
Yeah, they need a minute.
The other thing I'd say is defining the first day of birth. We often saw litters in which we'd have 10, 11, 12, 13 pigs come relatively close in time. And then 5, 6, 8, 10 hours later, we get what we call a trailer pig. So, and that was pretty common. So,
Yeah.
don't. I remember that I was so excited about the first the first sows we imported. They got pregnant. We set up this beautiful experiment. I spent a lot of time away from the family and watched those litters and counted pigs. And then I'd come back the next day. Where the heck this pig come from? And that was the trailer pig. I hadn't stuck around long enough. So
Yeah.
be aware that happens. Don't just think it's over.
Yep. All right. I'm going to jump in with the next question. Does the Meishan hog offer anything significant to a sustainable farmer?
Yeah. So many of the people that choose some of these heritage breeds, of which or more representative, like the Meishan, are basically not what some might term factory farmers. So they're people that raise a limited number of breeding stock. They raise them on, in many cases, rather rough ground with limited sheds and facilities. And so you need a pig that's extremely hardy to be sustainable. So I always ask people, what do you mean by sustainable? You mean it lives, it produces, makes you money? Those are all things associated with sustainability. And Meishan is one of the breeds that tends to be pretty hardy, does well in most conditions that are not what I would call ideal for the modern pig that's raised in a more industrial situation. So yes, in those situations, Meishan's quite sustainable, and it's sustainable also because it's not as picky about its feed source. It's gentle, so you don't have to worry about it beating you up or chasing you as much as you might with some other breeds. Yeah, I think they are sustainable. But again, that depends on what you call sustainable and what your operation is that requires for sustainability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to
think
make
they,
the point also that they don't require as, how should I say, you can build facilities that have a smaller footprint. There are pigs that I would not want to raise if I didn't have concrete. And you don't need concrete for Meishan pigs. You can build pretty simple pens for them compared to a lot of breeds.
Yeah, I think that they're undervalued right now as an ideal homestead hog, being a lard hog, and that you can process them at various sizes, kind of whatever you need. But I think that will catch on in the foreseeable future. Jonathan, do you have some more questions you want to ask?
Oh, I think I'm through most of mine.
Okay, then I'll jump back in with another one. Where could Meishan pork fit in with the average consumer's wallet and meal plan? I think that's a broad question too. That could go a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think you have to define what the average consumer wants. So the average consumer goes to the store and the grocery store and buys commodity pork. And commodity pork tends to be a cross of a large white landrace with some type of sire breed like Duroc or Duroc Hampshire or Duroc Burrock, a Berkshire, or some synthetic line that's produced by the breeding companies. Those and they are raised to a certain weight to produce a certain meal portion size. So the pork chops are approximate size. The butts are at a certain size if you want to make pulled pork and so on, and they're produced in large numbers and sold at a certain price. That's not so. The average consumer is not looking for the Meishan pig in my mind. I think educated consumers that are looking for a higher meat quality pork, what we sometimes call white tablecloth pork. There's a variety of breeds out there of which the Meishan would fit in one of those. People that are wanting to purchase specialty products, charcuterie, certain sausages, things like that, the Meishan fits well into that. Now, that's not the average consumer. The average consumer is trying to buy the lowest cost pork to put on the table. So I think that if you're going to raise Meishan pigs, and you haven't done it yet, you need to figure out who your consumer is, who's buying your product, and work towards that. And don't believe that's the guy or the gal going to the supermarket to buy the cheapest pork they can find.
Right, right. If you're trying to beat the 1.99 a pound white meat pork, you're in the wrong business. Just the grow out time alone for the Meishan versus other breeds puts a higher cost on the table. So yes, thank you for your outline there. All right, next question. I heard that Meishan hogs are really docile. Is there a chance I could have one as a family pet, and what living arrangements would I need for that?
Well, I guess I don't know if that's a man or a woman asking, but I guess I'd ask my spouse the first question. I know what my wife would say. There are I'll be honest with you. Pigs are incredibly intelligent, and they can make pets. But just as I keep some dog breeds outside, and I would never bring them inside, I would never bring a pig inside. That's a starting point. If you really determine to have a pig as a pet, a lot of people several years ago bought into the Asian potbelly pigs. They were good pets. Again, I was always perplexed, surprised, amazed that anyone would have a pig in their house. Now, you could probably potty train them, but like I said, a dog's a lot more loyal and a lot more friendly. I can't imagine having a pig as a pet. And if you're really dying, I work in an animal shelter. We have lots of guinea pigs that are given up. Those make good pets as well. I just don't see a pig as a pet. You can certainly train them, and they can be reasonable outside, but not indoors.
We've got a few people that have really done a good job with it. Now, I'm with you, Max. I'm not that person, but I'm also pretty much an empty nester. I'm not bringing animals in my house right now.
I'm not saying it can't be done. I just can't figure out why you'd want to do it.
Right, yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. What climate did the breed originate from, and is there a particular area of the U.S. that would be best because of that?
So they came from the Taihu region of China, the area of rivers and lakes, and it was a relatively temperate climate. So I guess you'd say the Midwest, the South where it's not too humid, probably might be the best. But nobody should be with climate change and and I'm not talking about who made the climate change. Climate change is by nature and by man all the time. Everybody who raises a livestock or raises animals, dogs outside, have the responsibility of creating environments that are safe for the animals. So I would never think of raising any pigs in, for instance, Arizona, where it's hot, really hot, unless there were air conditioning or drip fans or buildings to provide shade. So they can be raised in nearly all climates, probably not the frozen north very well, unless, again, they're housed and heat's provided. But Meishans probably would do best in which a large percentage of the year they could be outdoors and it's not too hot and not too cold. But I think anybody who raises livestock has the responsibility of raising animals in a humane fashion. That means water, food, reasonable housing conditions.
I think that's a great point.
What I tell people is it's whatever you do with your other livestock. If you're in Michigan and you overwinter all your animals in your barn, then that's what the Meishan needs too.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out that pigs as a species specifically, that's really critical. I was talking with my vet about this. Like ruminants, they're nomadic grazing animals. They have a way of keeping themselves warm when it's cold. Pigs are an intelligent animal, so they get out of it when they're in bad weather. And so they cannot, they need to be out of the wind and the rain when it's cold. They need to have wallows to wallow in when it's hot. They don't have the natural resilience to weather that a lot of animals like cattle do.
Yeah, just yesterday, it's an interesting question. Just yesterday, I was on a phone call with a friend of mine from New York City, and they asked me, how do those wild pigs withstand Canada? And I said, well, A lot of the year, Canada's fine. The temperatures are good. The rest of the time they got to seek shelter, and so they'll create their own shelters in caves or using a lot of nesting material. It's not ideal, but they put on a lot of body fat, which is insulation, so they make it work. But it's not desirable.
Definitely. All right, we've got a couple more here, and that will close this one down. So let's keep going. This member says, from what I understand, the Meishans were saved just in time before they were all about to be slaughtered here in the U.S. My question would be, why was it not a huge priority for anyone keeping the breed alive, and why did it take nearly losing them to begin preserving them? Was it politics, government restrictions, lack of a civilian interest, or popularity in the breed?
Yeah, so this is like all breeds that are and we see this particularly in Europe right now, where some of the heritage breeds are starting to become extinct, if you like, not enough breeding pairs, and why organizations like Livestock Conservancy tries to protect them. Generally speaking, government has no role in this. Let's start at that point. There are some government repositories. It's unclear what's going to happen in the present administration in protecting those repositories, but where semen is kept, hopefully it'll be maintained. But in general, animals that have an economic advantage, those breeds are kept, and animals without an economic advantage are lost. So Meishans were brought here into the U.S. to look at certain specific traits. When the research units at USDA, Iowa State, and Illinois, and one of the breeding companies said, well, we found a few things we like, but not enough to keep the breeds, nobody stepped up to the plate right away to say, oh, we got to have those. And they didn't, because they didn't see that there was an economic advantage. When some entrepreneurs, like Laura and Jonathan and other members said, and people before them said, yeah, this is a breed that has some certain characteristics. It'll work for homesteaders. They're sustainable. It'll produce some certain meat products that we might like. Then they started saving the pigs. So, as always, people have to see, in general, an economic reason. We don't have unlimited money for zoos for pig breeds. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad people saved them. I think they have some. They're not a commodity pork producer, but they have some advantages.
Well, and they also don't have a history in the United States. I know, like in Europe, there's more of a coordinated effort by the government because of the cultural significance of those breeds. Mm-hmm. They have a long and important history in the places that they originate. Whereas in the United States, we don't really have that with the Meishan.
That's right. And if you look at breeds that are well protected in Europe that have very limited numbers, Mangalitsa is one that people talk about. It's in the U.S. as well. And it competes a bit in the space, not in the sustainability space, but in the space for specialty meat products. It competes a little with Meishan. But it's protected in Europe because of the historical significance to certain cultures.
Interesting. And for what it's worth, in my retail store, I see a trend towards these pigs, healthy fats and all those sort of things. So, all right, this is my last question. A second question from the same as the last one is in regards to managing their breeding program. What were their initial goals when breeding, and did those goals change as their program went on? If so, how did that change the management of the herds?
Well, historically, I'm not sure if they're talking about it here in the U.S. or not, but historically, Meishans were kept in China because they were docile, they were prolific, they ate feedstuffs that were of high value to humans. So they could be maintained as part of a household and be productive. Here in the U.S., they were brought in essentially to the 3 units for research purposes. Could we use them to find genes that were responsible for better litter size, better meat quality? Could they be used in crossbreeding? And would consumers want that pig? So the 3 units did not select the pigs. they tried to understand them. They tried to experiment with them and see what the value of them, their value was to the general pork production. They didn't, for instance, look at niche markets, and they certainly didn't select on size and whatever. Chance played an enormous role. So when they dispersed the herds, the pigs that eventually ended up as the foundation stock for the American Meishan breeders, chance played a big role in which those animals were.
It did. Huge role.
A huge role. And so you're kind of left with what chance provided you with, and now you should be selecting animals that, as I said, are prolific, that maintain the breed. I don't want to use the word standard, but maintain the breed appearance, and that you can register, and that you'll work towards perhaps getting pigs that produce slightly larger litters, slightly better growth rate, and of course they're hardy, and they remain hardy and produce good meat quality.
Yeah, and my perception of it is that the Meishan wasn't brought over to study the Meishan and make the Meishan a standalone breed over here. It was how could it help the American pork market, and what could you learn from the Meishan?
Absolutely. I mean, at no time did we say we got to make Meishan pigs the rage. Right. That was never the case. And in my lab was directed towards primarily looking at understanding litter size and what genes controlled it, and we were extremely successful at that, and I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think it's also worth adding that how much the market for pigs like this has grown since the research was done. I mean, there's a poultry breeder I know of that's a preservationist that refers to the 90s as the Dark Ages, because that's when everybody was getting rid of their heritage breed animals. And I think, judging from the numbers, like farmers market and the farm to table movement, that was all in the late 2000s into the early 2010s. So, I mean, for the longest time while they were at the research facilities, this entire culture and demand and niche market really didn't exist. And it probably just started coming on at the very tail end of research.
And that's right. And it coincided, you're exactly right, Jonathan. It coincided with the big push to move indoors for pig production, scale up to what some people negatively call factory farming, but what I call modern farming. So the big push of taking the primary breeds in the U.S. and scaling them up, putting them on concrete, trying to improve the growth rates and produce commodity pork for less money. That was the big push. And so, as one might expect, some of the heritage breeds got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually just looked it up, like the documentary Food Inc. that was really popular on Netflix. That didn't come out till like 2008. That's when people like Joel Salatin or whatever kind of started becoming more known in the public, was basically by the time this research was wrapping up.
Right.
Interesting. All right. Well, that concludes my list of questions. Jonathan, you got anything else?
No, that's everything.
All right, Max, anything else you'd like to add?
I just say that I always enjoy answering questions for people. I try and do my best to do that. There aren't any stupid questions. There's some that perplex me, but there aren't any stupid questions. So please feel free. We can do this again sometime. But, the animals are biology, so there's no hard and fast answers. And again, you all have small samples. So work with each other to try and look at the big picture, not just the little picture produced by one litter on your farm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a great group of members and a lot of experience now as far as for the time we've been doing it, several of us that would love to help. So, all right, well, I guess until next time, I'm going to go ahead and get this one uploaded. This is Monday. I'll have it uploaded tomorrow, and then I've got a bunch of other ones to get out there too. We've got lots of great comments on the podcast we have released, and we have some other great ones coming for you guys. And of course, if you have any topics or anything you want us to talk about, reach out, ambameshon@gmail.com. And thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
Great.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.